Hello, 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 and welcome to a less lit, a poorly lit uh, video. I'll make it quick because this lighting is horrible. Um, yeah, there's not much I can do. I am not at home, as you can tell. I am traveling for work, and so yeah, we're here, and this is going to be a forgive the lighting situation, but alas. We are turning up for today's reading. I'm just gonna bring up the my Bible. Um, I do hope you've had a good day so far. Hope you've had a chance to jump into the Word, and let's get into it. So today's verses were Exodus 19 to 21, and Moses is they've been 2 months now into their journey. They have arrived at the wilderness of Sinai, and over here, uh, God is going to have some interactions with them. And again, as we remember, as we've seen so far, God's been pretty big on having interactions with his people. It's not wanted to be a God of, from afar. He's wanted to be a God that's very much in contact with his people. And we're about to see a bit of that here. They get to the mountain, and if I'm correct, this is the same mountain that was promised. Who was promised? I'm literally going to jump in and go to our good friend AI. Mount Sinai for Israel eventually did. Okay, it was, yeah, okay. So it was Moses himself. In Exodus 3, God gives Moses the sign that he sent him. And in Exodus 3:12, he literally tells him, you will bring the people out of Egypt to worship God on this mountain. And he's about to do that now. Interestingly, well, I guess maybe because we know that they also didn't. Well, either way, this could have been, yeah. So I was just thinking now that God had moved Israel through a different, longer path. Um, because if they were to go straight through the land of Philistines and face war, they would, lose heart. And I was wondering if this was as a consequence of that, and yet predicted back in Exodus 3. But actually, I'm realizing, because I'm not looking at a map, that it could very well have been this was just delayed. And was always going to be the case as God had predicted. But anyway, Moses goes up to the mountain, and literally God says to him, "All right, cool. You've seen what I've done to the Egyptians. I will carry you. If you obey me and keep my covenant, then you will be my special treasure from among other peoples on earth." And what a way to be described by God. You will be his own special treasure if you keep his covenant and obey him. Um, and it's not obeying him in things that were bad for the people. Obeying him was literally good for the people themselves. And he says, he will make them his special treasure, a kingdom of priests, a holy nation. Now, we know that the priestly line falls with Leviticus, or the Levites, Aaron and his line. But a kingdom of priests, to my ears, is reminiscent of a royal priesthood, which is what God makes us in the long run. And so it's quite clear that God's always had this in mind. Obviously, Israel and Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and his people are obviously a unique selection that God uses to first introduce himself to the world in this manner. and out with him come Christ, in human form. But it's quite special. um, Moses then comes and tells the people, and they brazenly say, "Yes, we will do everything that God does." And God says, "Cool, come down to Mount Sinai, and all the people will see me speak with you, so that they'll trust you." And again, there's this theme of God setting Moses up to be the intermediary between them. And Moses goes down and he gets them all ready. When God eventually does come down, um, he and coming down makes the mountain so holy that he warned no one to touch it, because if they are, they'd be destroyed. Um, but yes, Moses then goes up to meet with him, and he then yes, yeah. So God tells Moses to go and bring Aaron back, um, and told him that they should not break through and try and approach. Exodus 20, the Ten Commandments. The Ten Commandments are given. I'm not going to go through the Ten Commandments. We all should know them. But it's interesting, these commandments, and subsequently they almost get broken down into, you know, hundreds of other laws. But these are contained, I think, um, to give a sense of good and evil, well, a sense of holy and evil, I think, because this is specifically as pertains to God, not just the good that we know by our natural senses, or um, by our natural sensibilities and common sense, but rather a good versus evil that pertains specifically to God, like not taking His name in vain, like not having other gods outside of Him, and like honoring your parents, and that being associated with the promise of good and long life. And so he God gives them these laws, and um, the people are scared of God, because as they're receiving this, they are hearing the thunder of God's presence, and the ram's horn. They're like, okay, you speak to us, don't let God speak to us, because we will die. And Moses is like, don't be afraid, for God has come so that you will fear Him, and your fear of Him will actually mean that you don't sin. Because it's important to know, and that's why it's important for us also to not just treat God a as an ATM, or just as Daddy God, Daddy Lord. Not nothing against that. Our relationships with God, I think, do take a fatherly form, but they should also take a form of master, a form of creator. Like, there has to be a reverence, there has to be a fear, an understanding of who God is. Um, such as would also prevent us from sinning. So Moses then goes on to, give the Ten Commandments, and then starts breaking down other things, like how to use altars, what an altar should be made of, how to use it, and then treatment of slaves, and then sort of social social rules. What happens when one person kills another accidentally or intentionally? What happens when one person loses livestock? What happens when one person's what happens when one person is bought as a slave? How to treat slaves, how to treat foreigners, all of these things, Moses starts to break down. And what's super interesting here, and there's and ties into a an article I'm writing on culture, is God is taking these people, and He's not outright like just throwing out their culture. The idea of slavery, the idea of loans, all of these things were present, and were already there, but He's reforming it, right? So now, as opposed to just someone being in indentured servitude for however long they were doing it at a time, for the Hebrew, there's 6 years. I think it's 6 years, right? Um, I think it's 6 years. Yes, if you buy a Hebrew slave, he may serve for no more than 6 years, and then he must be set free in a second. So all of a sudden, there's like a regulation on this. Um, and of course, slavery back then is very different from slavery now. It wasn't what we saw, during the transatlantic slave trade. No, it was literally a way and a means of paying debt. It was also a way and a means of associating yourself with like a more successful home, or a more successful um, uh, man, or family. It provided certain benefits. The slaves of Rachel and Leah became mothers of the 12 tribes. Um, Hagar was a slave, and albeit she had issues with her mistress. She was also blessed and came to know Jehovah. What was her name? The Lord who sees me. So it was a very different type of slavery. But we see God starting to reform the culture and make it much more. I don't want to say kind, but make it better. Make it better. You know, I was also thinking about this as well. So there's um, much made of the fact that a male slave can go free, but not a woman. Yes, if a man sells his daughter as a slave, she will not be freed at the end of 6 years, as the men are. If she doesn't satisfy her owner, he must not allow her. He must allow her to be brought back. All of that. But I also remember it's like in those times, being a woman was pretty precarious. Look, I don't want to say look at Dinah, but look at what happened to Dinah, right? A single woman, sort of, you were exposed in a way that I think we probably can appreciate now, but wouldn't admit to because gender equality. But back then, like even being a wife, so Leah being a wife, Rachel being a wife, being sister wives, there was more to it than just the emotional sort of butterflies thing that we think of today. It was also very much a form of security. It was very much as part of the society, a a a matter of status. And so even with like the females not being set free at the end of 6 years, you got to remember when a man sells his daughter for that period of time that she's slave. Um, she's protected by her owner, right? For lack of a more um, palatable word. I can't remember what the word is I'm trying to look for. But she, when at the end of 6 years, if she's just let go, what may have happened to her father or to she's no longer owned by someone, but no longer also protected by someone, which the Bible, the law doesn't allow. So it's not that she's less, but it's that in that time, there's a lot more going on that were dangerous for women, and so being associated with someone that protects you wasn't a bad thing. But anyway, we start to see God regulating their culture and begin to move through it, and that's pretty much where 21 goes. I said I'm gonna keep this one nice and light because my light is pretty bad. But alas, that's where we are. Tomorrow's readings are Exodus 22 to 24. Um, give it a read. I hope this always encourages you to give your Bible a read. And God willing, I'll see you tomorrow. All right. Peace out. I'm out.